We've spoken about the effect that the Article 6 campaign would have on people globally, especially we've focused on Palestine. Brother Shahid, I wanted to ask you, how would the invocation of Article 6 affect the average citizen in the United States? How would that affect them?
Well, first, I wouldn't. I understand that that's a question or that's a concern that some people might have. I would say that it's a misplaced concern. That shouldn't be your priority. We're told all the time, regular American citizens, average American citizens, tell us all the time, us in the Muslim world, us in the global South, and so on, all of the countries that have been colonized and have been subjugated by the United States, they always tell us it's our government, it's not us. We don't support that. Well, this is an opportunity for you to show that. This is an opportunity for you to prove that you aren't what your government does, that you don't actually support the subjugation, you don't actually support colonization, you don't actually support the wars and the state-sponsored terrorism that the United States inflicts around the globe. This is an opportunity for you to prove that. This is an opportunity for you to prove what I grew up believing were the American values of doing what you say, of keeping your word, of keeping your promises, of when you sign a contract, you fulfill that contract. This is an opportunity for the American people to prove to the world that they mean those things, that they actually mean it, because we all know that your government doesn't mean it. So you need to prove to the rest of the world that you mean it. And I think that just on a moral level will be good for the average American citizen. It will be good for the American society to take a very important step in trying to end the hypocrisy of American policy, the hypocrisy of the way that America says one thing and does another continuously. We know at this point that almost any time they say something, they're going to do the exact opposite of that, especially when they're talking about some moral values or some principled policy. We know every time every time they bring morals or principles into a policy discussion, it's precisely because they're going to enact an immoral and unprincipled policy. So if the American people sign this petition and support the Article 6 campaign and say, no, actually, America is a signatory to the United Nations Charter, and the United Nations Charter does state that any member, including the United States, any member that persistently violates the rules, that violates the principles of the Charter, well, they should be expelled. So if the American people support that, I think that will be an important moral victory that can start to undo some of the psychological damage, the emotional damage, the intellectual damage, not to mention the reputational damage of the United States all around the world. But domestically, it's possible that there could be some economic consequences for the society in the United States, insofar as America has historically run its economy on the basis of the military-industrial complex. And that's one of the reasons why they wanted to dominate the United Nations, so that they could continue pursuing war and conflict all around the world, which fueled their economy. So if the United States does get more isolated and is kicked out of the United Nations, and by being kicked out of the United Nations, they lose their ability to act with impunity all around the world and to spread conflict and violence and war, then that could potentially impact their weapons sector, their weapons industry, and the military-industrial complex. However, over the last, say, 25 years, 30 years or so, the economy has been shifting to include many other sectors. So it's not just the weapons industry anymore. Now you can say that the military-industrial complex is mostly served politically by the so-called neocons. And the neocons, as I've mentioned recently, are sort of embodied in the personality of Joe Biden, which is to say that it's a decrepit, on its deathbed political ideology. Today, with globalized financial capital, with globalization, with the rise of corporate power, a national corporate power, the neocons are an antiquated political faction. So the isolation of the United States is already something that's happening anyway. It's already something that the owners and controllers of global financialized capital are interested in pursuing and have been pursuing. So I don't think that removal of the United States from the United Nations will necessarily have that great of an economic impact, because the economy isn't as war-based as it used to be, and the prioritization of the American economy by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital has already declined, has already decreased. They're less interested in the national economy of the United States. But again, that's something that the American people are going to have to be facing anyway, with or without their removal from the United Nations. That's something that they're going to be facing anyway. So I don't really see it having a huge impact, except a positive impact in terms of what would be the moral achievement of the American people if they supported actually implementing the charter that they signed.
It does make sense that the United States would be going through these changes, regardless of whether the Article 6 goes through or not. I just wanted to ask Sister Selma, do you have we seen this in history before? Have we ever seen Article 6 get invoked or almost get invoked before?
Okay, great question. The historical precedents, right, that exist for the expulsion. The expulsion of a member state from an international organization is rare, and there are no direct precedents for a member state being expelled from the United Nations. However, there are a few notable instances in other international organizations that can be considered as precedents. For one, the League of Nations in 1939. The Soviet Union was expelled from the League of Nations following its invasion of Finland. This is one of the most significant examples of a state being expelled from an international organization due to aggressive actions that were deemed incompatible with the principles of the organization. And then the second precedence was by the Organization of American States. In 1962, Cuba was suspended from participating in the OAS due to its alignment with communist ideologies and perceived threats to Western Hemisphere's peace and security. Though not an expulsion, this suspension was an example of a member state being excluded from an international body. So the campaign to invoke Article 6 against the US would be unprecedented in the context of the UN, but it's rooted in the idea that organizations can and should hold their members accountable for persistent violations.
With regards to, has this happened before? Has a nation been expelled before? Well, no nation has needed to be expelled before. That's the other side of the question. It's over 75 or more than 75 years. No nation has been so bad. No nation has been has committed so many violations that they deserve to be expelled from the United Nations. That's the real question. Isn't it remarkable that in 75 years or more than 75 years, Article 6 has never been invoked against a country because it is never, no country has ever committed violations as persistently as the United States. But after more than 75 years, and the violations that have been committed by the United States, they've committed more violations than the number of years that the United Nations has existed as an organization. So after all of this time, we have a very clear case to prove the persistence. You know, the Article 6 specifically says a nation, a member state that has persistently violated the principles of the Charter. So for persistence, you need a record. You need a certain period of time, a decent period of time, a sufficient period of time where you can prove that this is persistent. It's not a one-off. It's not every once in a while. Well, we have, from the beginning of the United Nations until today, there has been no nation that has more persistently violated the principles of the Charter than the United States. So I think that the question of whether or not it has happened before is more or less irrelevant, except in terms of as a procedural question. But in terms of whether or not it's something that should be done, the point is that we're even talking about it now because there hasn't been a nation that has deserved to be expelled from the United Nations more than the United States, and it has become more and more clear over just the last few years, and more precisely over the last 9 months, the extent to which the United States deserves to be expelled on the basis of the Article 6 in the Charter.
When you sign this petition, you are essentially working with people all around the world, so far 85,000 people, to remove this power from the United States, because the United States has been invading so many countries as of late. If you look at their very, very modern history, so over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, you see that the types of war crimes that they've committed and authorized have been much worse than any other country. Even when we look at the United Kingdom has a very long history of colonization and brutality, but within modern history have seen, especially since the inception of the United Nations, it has been the US who has been consistently violating the principles of the United Nations. And Article 6 is built in within the Charter of the United Nations, meaning that they knew that a country can possibly do this, and it is a backdoor, it's a way out, it's a way to help the United Nations. So essentially, if it's there, we should use it.
We have a question saying that please name a single opportunity where the UN efficiently resolved conflict.
It's a rigged question that overlooks the very obvious fact that the only thing that the United Nations has ever been able to do effectively is to pursue American policy. That's what they're able to do effectively because of the domination of the United States of the UN. The United States agreed to the formation of the United Nations. It orchestrated the formation of the United Nations precisely so that it could continue to operate unilaterally under the camouflage of multilateralism, under the camouflage of consensus. But what they've always done is act unilaterally, and they've always upheld their right to act unilaterally. And so they have always scuppered the ability of the United Nations to settle any conflict that is in America's interests. So the United Nations has been subject and has been subjugated and is subordinate to American policy. So how are they supposed to effectively resolve a conflict that their boss has started? How are they supposed to effectively resolve a conflict that America has instigated, and America is funding, and America is arming, and America is exploiting for their own economic material benefit? That's not the way that the United Nations is supposed to work under American domination. If it wasn't under American domination, then I can tell you at least one conflict that would have been resolved 50 years ago. And that's the conflict that we're talking about right now, the conflict in Gaza, the Palestinian situation. That would have already been resolved. Before I was even born, that situation would have been resolved if America wasn't dominating the United Nations. So what we should talk about is all of the conflicts in the world that the United Nations has not been allowed to resolve because of American domination. When you raise instances of the United Nations being ineffective or incompetent, or being even complicit in illegal conflicts, all you're doing is making a case for Article 6. That's all you're doing, because those things happen because of American domination of the institution. So every instance, like if you want to talk about it's a failed system, or the United Nations is politicized, or the United Nations didn't do this or didn't do that, or it committed this crime or so on, all you're doing is making a case for the expulsion of the United States. That's all you're doing. We're asking people to sign a petition. And it takes you the same amount of time and the same amount of effort as it takes for you to, for example, leave a comment on a YouTube video for someone who's not even going to see your comment. But it's much more effective, and it gives us, the purpose of the petition is not an end in and of itself. It's a means. It's a means of creating a gauge to show popular support for the invocation of Article 6. And with that measurement of popular support, we can then raise the issue to the diplomatic and political levels, because politicians are interested in popular opinion. And in order for them, as I say, this is a very bold move. Even though all you're doing is asking for rules that already exist to be implemented, it's a very bold move. So politicians need to know that they have backing from the grassroots. They need to know that there is a global wave of support for the invocation of Article 6. And so if you sign the petition, it's not an impotent measure. It's not something that is of no effect, of no impact. It definitely has an impact the closer that we can get to 100,000 signatures. And once we can get to 100,000, inshallah, we can continue to surpass that goal. But once we get to 100,000, that's when we're going to, we'll have the confidence to raise the issue to the political and diplomatic level and start talking about which countries that we want to raise the issue with, to have them raise it at the United Nations. It's not a pointless thing to sign the petition, because we're not talking about just signing the petition. It's a means to an end. The petition isn't an end in and of itself. It's just a way of gauging popular opinion and proving that there is grassroots global support for the invocation of Article 6 and for the United Nations to actually operate according to the rules that they signed, including the United States. So I would encourage everyone and urge everyone to please go to the link and sign the petition. Again, it only takes a few moments, but inshallah, it can have a great impact.